Hello everyone, I am Demented Kirby, and welcome to my channel, the Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews and other deck techs. On this episode of the Brewery, I will finally be discussing a mono-white commander, and that is Sram Senior Edificer. Sram is a 2/2 Dwarf Advisor for 1 generic and 1 white. He has, whenever you cast an aura, equipment, or vehicle spell, draw a card. A card in the command zone with the ability to consistently draw is a strong one in this format, especially in mono white, a color combination that is considered by many to be lower tier in EDH. Fortunately, Sram is a 2/2 for 2 mana that can go off incredibly quickly thanks to that ability. He might not draw as many cards in mono blue with Azami Lady of Scrolls or as a mono red with Zada Hedron Grinder, but Sram definitely gets the job done. Although you can draw off casting auras and vehicles, neither of these card types currently exist with the casting cost of 0, at least as of the recording of this video. That's why Sram is colloquially called the Cheerios Commander, since most of the artifacts in the deck cost 0. The benefits of running these equipments is that they basically replace themselves. This makes the deck incredibly consistent since it reduces the actual size of the deck to way less than 100, meaning that you can dig deep to find your win conditions with minimal effort. So, although these cards might seem incredibly lackluster and of little to no impact in a format like this one, these zero-costed equipment become free cantrips. Therefore, the deck runs all of them: a Quarter Shield, Bonesaw, Cathode Shield, Kite Shield, Paradise Mantle, Sigil of Distinction, and Spider Silk Net. These cards are included solely as a means to replace themselves, since most of them have high equip cost. Further along in the video, you'll see ways to bypass equip costs altogether, but the fact remains that these equipment are included solely as a way to dig through the deck. Doing so also helps with a couple of the win cons, but we'll get to that later on. The deck also includes other zero-costed artifacts like Mana Crypt, Mox Amber, and Mox Opal, but these don't trigger Sram. Obviously, they're the best acceleration for the deck, but are by no means the only ones, and you don't need to invest in them to have a good Sram deck. That being said, including them also helps Storm out, as I mentioned earlier, but that's something we're going to see later on. Unfortunately, not all equipment can cost 0. However, there are currently 57 equipment cards in Sram's color identity as of the recording of this video. Paying 1 generic mana to draw 1 card doesn't seem so bad, so let's see. First, I'll explain how to make these skinny casting costs fatten up into a big ol' 0, and then I'll go into greater detail as to why I included these particular 26 ones out of the 55 equipment with 1 better mana cost. Fortunately, Mono White has access to Cloud Key, Helm of Awakening, Joyous Familiar, and Foundry Inspector. If you choose artifacts with Cloud Key, then every artifact you cast costs 1 less. Although the deck has plenty of 1-costed artifacts, there are also other artifacts, so having as many of these effects in play can really make a difference. As for the 1-costed equipment, first let's get to the shaft out of the way. Bone Splitter, Civic Saber, Honed Kopesh, Leonin Scimitar, Neglected Heirloom, Shard of Broken Glass, Short Sword, and Sylvok Life Staff. If you notice, what these equipment have in common is that they're all 1-costed with an equip cost of 1 generic mana. Also, they have some sort of pump effect. It might not seem like much, but if you manage to equip Sram with enough pump effects, he becomes a win con all his own via Voltron. If they're free, it's great, but when you run out of steam, you can really use any available mana to at least equip Sram or any other creatures with these cards. Shuko is even better than these since it costs the same while having an equip cost of 0. I really hope we return to Kawagama someday soon. The other 1-costed equipment have their uses besides just being good gas for the deck. Basilisk's Collar has an equip cost of 2 while being able to grant Death Touch and Lifelink. The deck runs few creatures, so being able to recover life is a must. Blade of the Blood Chief is another 1 to cast, 1 to equip artifact. However, its boon is permanent in that it grants its equipped creature a +1/+1 counter whenever any creature dies. Bloodforged Battle Axe costs 2 to equip, but it's great in the deck. It has the appropriate casting cost and it has a decent pump. What makes it even better is that it creates a copy of itself whenever equipped creature deals combat damage. This ability is exponential since its copies do the same. This ability combos excellently with Pure Steel Paladin, but I'll talk about that card soon enough. Colossus Hammer is just such a stupid card in the best possible way. Giving Sram +10/+10 has the potential of ending games pretty quickly. It might cost 8 to equip, but the deck has some ways to cheat equip costs, which we will see soon enough. Flayer Husk has Living Weapon, which is useful in providing a 1/1 creature that triggers Sram. It's another body to equip things to, so it has the potential of being a chump blocker or an attacker. The equipment itself has 2 equip, which isn't ideal for the deck, but it isn't bad either. Golem Skin Gauntlets is crazy in this deck. For an equip cost of 2, it gives you a creature +1/+0 for each equipment attached to that creature. There are 40 equipment cards in the deck, so chances are that whatever it equips is going to be huge. Hedron Blade might cost 2 to equip in order to gain +1/+1, but at least it grants conditional death touch. The creature would have to be blocked by a colorless creature, but at least it's something. Sigh of the Shinobi costs 2 to equip and grants +1/+1, but it can be equipped on Sram for free when he enters the battlefield. I know that the point is to cast these things after Sram is on the battlefield, but it's good to know that if we had to recast him, he can enter the battlefield as a 3/3. Onaginata isn't all that impressive, but at least it can grant +3/+0 for an equip cost of 2 while only costing 1 to cast. Prime Blade gives +1/+0 for an equip cost of 2, but what's most useful from it is that it creates a treasure token whenever the creature deals combat damage to a player. Darksteel Axe costs 2 to cast, but it gives +2/+0 and is indestructible. Shield of the Avatar costs 2 to equip, but it helps protect the creature from receiving up to X damage less, where X is the number of creatures you control. Trusty Machete is a simple equipment in that it costs 2 to equip in order to grant +2/+1. Slagworm Armor costs 3 to equip, but it gives a very useful +0/+6 to any potential blocker. Rune Stalactite is perhaps one of the more useless ones in the deck, unless it actually matters to have a creature of a particular type under our control. The issue with it is costing 2 to equip. If better equipment comes along, this might be one of the first ones to get cut. Skull Clamp, one of the greatest equipment of all time, is another 1 to cast, 1 to equip artifact. The deck doesn't really take advantage of what makes it broken, but given the synergy in the deck and the hijinks it's capable of accomplishing, you can use it with its unintentionally broken purpose. Masterwork of Ingenuity is the equipment clone of the deck. With this, you can copy any equipment already in play, like maybe Colossus Hammer or Golem Skin Gauntlets for some extra power, or an epic equipment controlled by an opponent, like a Sword of X and Y. Similar to the 0-costed mana rocks, the deck also runs some 1-costed mana rocks to round out this category of artifacts, so it's no surprise that I've included Mana Vault and Soul Ring. With so many colorless cards in the deck, these mana rocks really pull their weight. The rest of the equipment have to be really something in order to be included in this deck. The cap should be a CMC of 1 in order to be cast for free with any of the 4 cost-reducing effects in the deck. At the very least, those equipment are just 1 mana for 1 card draw spells. That being said, Bloodthirsty Blade is a great include since it costs 2, which is not too far away from that 1 mana cap. Fortunately, it costs 1 to attach to a creature, but the creature it gets attached to is an opponent's. This card is basically a removal effect in equipment form, which is something Sram will no doubt love to have at his disposal. Conquerors Flail costs 2 to cast and 2 to equip, but it has a great ability. When equipped to a creature, it prevents opponents from casting spells during your turn. This is great in order to prevent anyone from countering or interacting with your win con, at least via spells cast. Darksteel Plate, Shield of Kaldra, and Hammer of Nazan all serve to give a creature indestructible, preferably sand. Darksteel Plate and Shield of Kaldra have the bonus of being indestructible themselves, while Hammer of Nazan can be equipped for free when it enters the battlefield. Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots serve a familiar function via protection, but at least they cost only 2 mana to cast. Fortunately, Lightning Greaves is free to equip and Swiftfoot Boots costs only 1 generic to equip. Alright, so what's the point of running all these equipments? Well, with enough digging in the deck, we can draw into a ton of cards. And drawing into a ton of cards can trigger one of our win cons, Psychosis Crawler. This freaky brain in a jar is star, but the point isn't to attack with it, it's to kill off opponents. Every time we draw a card, each opponent loses 1 life. That might not seem like a lot, and we probably might not kill off the Untitled Table in a single turn by drawing off of our artifacts. But it does get some work done, especially in the mid to late game when lives are shorter than at the start of a match. Besides drawing cards, we can also take advantage of actually casting spells. You guessed it, Flux Reservoir is included in this deck. I just love this card in Storm decks since it can get rid of an opponent easily enough after storming off. Casting a bunch of free spells in a single turn can really do some damage. The deck also includes Alhammarit's Archive, a card that benefits both of these win cons, since it doubles the amount of cards being drawn as well as the life being gained. Sure, they might cost a bit much for the deck, but at least these 3 artifacts enjoy the cost reduction benefits of the aforementioned quartet of cost reducing effects. These aren't the only win cons either. I mentioned Voltron earlier thanks to all the equipment in the deck. But casting all these spells doesn't just trigger Flux Reservoir, they also trigger Scroll of the Masters and Myth Realized. Both of these permanents gain counters for each of those non-creature spells being cast. Scroll of the Masters can epically pump a creature thanks to its counters, while Myth Realized becomes a huge creature thanks to its counters. And in order to make sure that Voltron creatures goes through, Rogue's Patches can be used to make it unblockable. Another card that triggers off of non-creature spells being cast is Monastery Mentor. Not only does it have prowess, but it creates creature tokens with prowess. This has the potential to create a huge army of huge beaters. Not only that, but when they lose their temporary pump, you can equip them with Skull Clamp to draw 2 cards to get even deeper into the deck. Another card that benefits from so many equipment is Kemba Ka Regent. Although you have to wait until your upkeep and you have to have a ton of equipment equipped to her, she creates a 2/2 cat token with each of those equipment equipped on her. Getting her out early enough in the game is no joke, especially if you get her to survive with equipment that give her Shroud and Indestructible. Now, clearly this deck would require an excessive amount of mana in order to be equipping all these cards onto your creatures. And that's not something Mono White can easily do. However, equipment is a strength in Mono White, and there are plenty of cards that interact with equipment in different ways. One way to cheat equipment costs is with Sigarda's Aid. Not only is it incredibly cheap to cast, but whenever an equipment enters the battlefield, you get to attach it to a creature you control for free. With this enchantment, you could even cheat Bloodthirsty Blade onto one of your own creatures for the jank. However, the best card in that regard is Pure Steel Paladin. Not only does it function as a second Sram in the deck, but it can also make your equipment cost 0 to equip. This means that we're able to really stack on those equipment for Voltron's strategy. Combining Pure Steel Paladin with Leonin Shikari makes it even better. Being able to equip Darksteel Plate or Swiftfoot Boots at instant speed amongst your creatures for 0 mana is almost the same as giving Indestructible and Shroud to all of your creatures. These creatures are so clutch in the deck that Recruiter of the Guard is included just to be able to tutor for them. On the topic of protection, the deck also runs Mother of Runes and Giver of Runes for that instant speed protection from a color. Just be careful with protection from colorless with the Giver, because then you won't be able to attach equipment onto that creature. Another great protection spell that's amazing in this deck is Flickering Ward. It's an aura that costs just 1 white, so it's a 1 mana cantrip. However, its protection isn't even the main reason to run it, that's just a bonus. What makes this card great is that you can return it to your hand for just 1 white mana. This means that this spell is essentially a 1 mana draw spell with a buyback cost of 1. This really helps when you're running out of steam and need ways to continue drawing into the deck. On the topic of not running out of steam, drawing into a land is one of the worst things to happen, especially when you don't need it. With so many free spells or ways of making those spells free, the deck is running the risk of having only 25 lands in it. Since Sram only costs 2 mana and the deck has plenty of rocks, we can run the chances. With a 1 out of 4 chances of drawing a land, we should be able to draw at least 2 lands in our opening hand in order to be able to cast Sram and any cheap equipment to continue burning through the deck. Those lands are Ancient Tomb, which is amazing in the deck since it could potentially pay for 2 equipment at once, 10 basic lands, and ways to thin the deck by tutoring for them. So the deck is running Arid Mesa, Flooded Strand, Marsh Flats, Prismatic Vista, and Windswept Heath. Although not technically a fetch land, at least if someone wipes the board of lands, Flank Stones of Trocaire can fetch up for a plains. And even if it doesn't come to that, you can still tap it for white without having it enter the battlefield tapped. Endless Horizons is the best card for thinning lands from the deck. When it enters the battlefield, you can exile all planes from your deck and then each upkeep you get 1 back. Since the purpose of this isn't to ramp or to guarantee a land each turn, it won't matter if it leaves the battlefield. Its main function is thinning the deck. Along the same vein and much cheaper as far as casting cost goes is Land Tax. Land Tax does an amazing job of thinning the deck of lands in order to reduce the odds of drawing into a land when you're trying to storm off or dig through the deck. The deck also includes Scroll Rack, which combos nicely with Land Tax. Combined with Land Tax, you get to shuffle your hand into your deck each upkeep. Even on its own, Scroll Rack is great at drawing cards and then putting cards from your hand back onto your library. Sometimes you might want to keep a fetch land around in case you need to shuffle your deck. You can also shuffle the deck after casting Enlightened Tutor. This can tutor for any artifact or enchantment you need in that moment, whether a mana rock for acceleration, one of the win cons, or even the aforementioned ways to keep the steam rolling. The deck also includes Inventor's Fair as a way to tutor for artifacts. Other ways of keeping the steam rolling is with Sensei's Divining Top and Mystic Forge. If you have nothing to cast to keep drawing cards, just use the top's draw ability. Then use the Forge to cast it off of the top of your library. If the top is free, you can do this indefinitely. Since the deck is reliant on casting equipment more so than keeping them around, it's not that big of a problem if anyone casts an overloaded Vandal Blast. And if anyone were to cast an overloaded Cyclonic Rift, they're actually doing us a favor. That being said, the deck does have ways to recuperate after a board wipe, such as Roar of Reclamation and Open the Vaults. These spells basically nullify the effects of that board wipe. The only reason I'm running these over cards like Faith's Reward and Second Sunrise is because the deck is so tight on mana that we might not have the mana open to respond to a board wipe. But come our next turn or turns, we can collect the mana to eventually recover our artifacts from the graveyard at a later time. Mistveiled Plains and Buried Ruin can be used to recover at least one card from our graveyard. The good thing is that they're an effect on a land, so they don't take up space. And Mistveiled Plains has the added bonus of being fetchable with the fetch lands. However, if we're the ones who need to wipe the board, then at least all this does makes everyone sacrifice anything that isn't colorless, so we at least get to keep our artifacts. Other cards are included in the deck to double up on effects like Grand Abolisher, having the same effect as Conquerors Flail, but better. Darksteel Mutation is also a great removal effect that triggers Sram when it enters the battlefield. What I love about this aura is that it's basically commander removal. Other protective effects come in the form of Maze of Ith and Core Haven. The deck doesn't run many creatures and only a couple of cards to create tokens. That means that if a huge creature gets through, we're toast. At least these lands help protect us from something we couldn't use many creatures to block. On that note, the deck is also running Crawl Space. When comboed with these two lands, it's very hard to attack us with creatures. Crawl Space being a 3-costed artifact isn't that big of a problem with all the cost reducing effects. Some more supportive effects are Reliquary Tower, which helps us maintain a fat hand, and Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth. Once the deck runs out of planes, the fetch lands are useless, but at least with Urborg out, they can tap for mana. This is just an idea on how to build around Sram Senior Edificer. Although Sram is pretty limited in brewing options, you can also go with vehicles and or auras, or even a combination of all three. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons of the Brewers for their patronage. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of the Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am Demented Kirby, and happy brewing.